You'd think I'd seen everything in my 3 decades as a lawyer, but the moment I walked into the courtroom and met the prosecutor's gaze, something changed, and it wasn't just the way he looked, young, confident, as if he owned the room. It was a whisper of the past I was trying to bury. I pushed that thought aside. I had a job to do, and cases like this don't win themselves, but in the back of my mind I guessed and suspected that this trial wouldn't end in the courtroom, and I had no idea how personal it would become. The case should have been simple. Petty theft usually only takes an hour or two, and this case was no different when I read the details. However, something changed when I met the man who was to work against me. Let me start at the beginning, for your sake, not mine. My name is Sarah, but most people call me Sadie. I am a well-respected attorney in Philadelphia and have been in the field for about 30 years, which is more than half my life. I live in a beautiful studio apartment in Center City, but since my husband left me 3 years ago, it has become too big for me. I can't imagine spending another minute of my life with that arrogant rat, but I miss having someone waiting for me in the living room when I wake up with 2 cups of cappuccino in hand from the little cafe on the next street. His ego couldn't accept that I was the breadwinner of the house. In fact, it made him feel small, so after 20 years he left. Despite my best efforts, I was never able to make my apartment feel anything like home, but as I always did, I managed it by finding another paying client. Routine chores tend to blend together. Bills are ordered by the English, but today was different. I arrived on time and got to work. I discussed all the details with the client. They had nothing against him except a few blurry pictures and circumstantial evidence. At the same time, we had an alibi. He was at home at the time of the crime. I felt better than usual, but that all changed when I walked into the courtroom. The prosecutor on the case was Jonathan Miller, a young rookie who had been making a splash for a few years now, though I hadn't had the pleasure of getting to know him. So far he had made an excellent impression, though when I first saw him he was already sitting at the plaintiff's table with his arms crossed and barely visible muscles on his suit. He was no more than 30, maybe even in his early 20s, but he held a confident, almost infectious air. He was handsome, classically handsome, like an old Hollywood actor. You could have sworn you'd seen him in one of your parents' favorite movies. As I approached the defendant's table, he caught my eye. I blushed and looked away, brushing the disheveled strands of hair out of my face, and thought, enough of this, let's get to the point. There was nothing unusual about the trial. Jonathan put up a good fight, but I knew it would be over before it even started. Still, I enjoyed seeing him fret over trying to cross-examine my client, knowing he had no argument. When the judge ruled not guilty, I felt a familiar sense of pride in a job well done. I looked at Jonathan, almost gloating, but to my surprise, he smiled at me, not smugly or sarcastically, just warmly and respectfully. That told me everything but the words, "well done." I smiled back, but didn't dwell on that moment for too long. Part of me wished I'd waited after the trial, told him he'd done a good job for someone so new to the profession, maybe even told him I'd buy him a drink to apologize for winning the case. But instead, I grabbed my stuff, congratulated my client, and headed home to spend another lonely night. What does a man like him want with an older woman like me anyway? He probably thinks I'll go home to my husband and 3 beautiful children in the suburbs, but still his name rang in my head like a wedding bell. The rest of the night I tried to read and watch TV in preparation for the next court date, but still all I could think about was that suit hugging him during the trial. His worry face made it even sweeter. I regretted not talking to him, but who am I kidding? I'm almost 60, I thought to myself. Let him be young, find someone his own age. I've had my share of fun. Now I spend my evenings watching reality TV and drinking wine from a box. Nothing wrong with that, but sometimes a woman needs something more, even at my age. I thought about it over and over again before finally stopping for the night and trying to get some rest, but if anything, the homesickness was even more unbearable. It was a hot August night, and all I could think about was how cold and empty my bed was. For now, I had to rely on my fingers to get the job done, but I deeply desired a connection that seemed unattainable at this stage of my life. The week dragged on in the usual haze of meetings, court proceedings, and occasional coffee dates with old friends who always insisted that I put my best foot forward. They meant well, but the thought of dating apps or awkward blind dates gave me the creeps. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of Jonathan, the way his smile lingered in the courtroom, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It wasn't love, not even close, but it was something, a spark I hadn't felt in years. I started daydreaming in a way I hadn't since my 20s, imagining what he might be like outside the courtroom. Does he have a favorite coffee shop? A secret hobby? Did he listen to jazz, classic rock, or something completely unexpected like indie folk? It wasn't until a week later, as I sat at a local bar with a couple of my old girlfriends in Center City, that I found him again. By this point, he was the last thing on my mind. I tried to deal with my feelings for a while, but after a few days, I resigned myself to the fact that I had virtually no chance with him. I was on my third martini glass when he caught my eye. Although he looked great in a suit and tie, I liked the shirt and jeans he was wearing much better. The shirt was unbuttoned just enough to hint at something. It seemed like he was clinging to every inch of it. I was dressed on my own, no narcissism. I think I have a great figure for my age, and I wasn't shy about showing it off. I came in a tight-fitting red dress, quite modest, that showed off my figure to everyone who was lucky enough to see me. After the girls spurred me on, and I felt the confidence from 3 glasses of martinis finally kick in, I got up and walked over to him at the bar. He didn't see me until I was about a meter away from him, and I made him jump when he finally turned around and saw me. "Oh my God, is that how you say hello to all your coworkers?" he said and laughed when the shock passed. "I can't look that bad," I joked back, smiling and hoping he would notice the slit dress I was wearing. "I don't think you look bad." It went through his head before he caught himself, and blushed just like he did during the trial. I blushed until I came to my senses and introduced myself to him. I hadn't felt like this in a long time. He brought us both another drink, and we started talking. He talked about his time at Penn State and his first job at a law firm. I felt old, realizing that I had only been at the same college for about 40 years. I thought about my old dorm room. It must have been renovated so many times since I last saw it, it might not even be there anymore. The thought of that depresses me, so I go off topic. "You're quiet today," I say, leaning in slightly and letting my voice become softer, more intimate than usual. Quieter than a courtroom, that's for sure. He cleared his throat. His eyes caught mine, but then quickly averted. "Just wondering," he murmured, and his lips curled into a small, shy smile. "I've got a busy week ahead of me, you know that." Despite the awkwardness, there was a teasing glint in his eyes, as if he was asking for more. "You'd be more convincing if you didn't look like you were trying to solve a mystery," I finally said. His eyes moved to me again, and this time he didn't look away. "It's part of the job, I suppose," he said in his low voice. There was something dangerous in the way he said it, something that made my pulse quicken. But he didn't give anything else away, nothing else. He could easily tell I was much older than he was, and I could imagine he must have been a little afraid of me because of my reputation. But from the way he looked at me when I wasn't paying attention to him, I could tell he was interested. I just had to find the right words to touch on that side of him. "You did a good job today. You know that, right?" I asked. "Do you really think so?" I felt like I made a fool of myself by the last hour. He stroked the back of his neck, his hair, perhaps out of nervous habit. The front strands of his fringe had curled downward over the last hour of our conversation, but I didn't mind. I thought he looked cute, if anything. But don't worry about it, he's cute, I said, scooting closer as he reminded me of when I was just starting out, trying to keep everything under control, tripping over papers, trying to impress everyone. When I finished the last word, I reached for his hair, fixing it and tucking a few strands behind his ear. I'd never done anything like that, at least not with a stranger, but in that moment it felt right, and I could tell he was as surprised as he was that he liked it. "Did I impress you? Did I impress you?" he asked, but I didn't want to just say that. He had to deserve it, I thought. He was sincere, but I understood what he was getting at. You'd have to be an idiot not to realize it. I stopped at that moment. All I could think about was how close he was, how easy it would be to engage in conversation with him, to let the lines blur. I was used to being in control, to keeping everything in check, but with him, everything was free, as if the rules didn't apply. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw that there was something in him, a spark, something raw and unrefined, like a fire that had yet to be extinguished. I cleared my throat and, going over the words in my head, finally said, "Would you like to come back to my place for the night?" He stared at me for a second, almost confused, and I was horrified to think I'd made a huge mistake. Had I misread the moment? Maybe he was just playing a trick on me, keeping the old lady company in exchange for a couple of free drinks. But finally he smiled back and said he'd love to. I was nervous, my spine practically slipping out of my back, but I was excited too. This was the furthest I'd gone on a date with a man since my divorce, and it was an amazing feeling to be back on track after 3 long and lonely years. We finished our drinks and walked out together, much to the delight of my friends who had been watching us breathlessly from afar all evening. We took a cab back to my studio apartment. The city lights dazzled us through the glass panes of the yellow cab. For the first time in years, I felt free. Even before my divorce, I never followed whims or did anything rash, and here I was a little tipsy with a man I'd only met once, and he was riding home with me. It was awful and wonderful at the same time. "Nice place you have here," he said as he looked around the apartment. I led him into the living room, and he grabbed a book off the shelf, lazily flipping through it while I poured each of us a glass. I sat down next to him in the living room and asked him what he was thinking about. "Well, you have a very beautiful place here. I don't think I'll ever be able to afford an apartment like this," he asked, looking me in the eye. "It's an awfully big place for one person, although it's not just me here. I moved here with my husband about 10 years ago." He got a little uncomfortable before I explained that we'd broken up a few years ago. "Not getting married, Jonathan. You should know better than anyone how much of a sham this whole thing is. You get butterflies fluttering in your stomach at first, but eventually they go away, and then you're just stuck falling asleep in a bed that's too big for you. He must have been really stupid to leave you." Well, he was an idiot. Maybe just don't marry an idiot. I'll do my best to make sure that doesn't happen. We laughed some more before there was silence in the room. I desperately wanted something to lighten the mood and bring back the Jonathan I'd met only a few hours ago. "Do you have girlfriends, boyfriends, crazy exes?" He fidgeted in his seat and took his time answering. "No, I haven't. I was too busy working after high school, I guess." I told him that was a shame, but secretly I was glad no one had taken it off the market yet. I couldn't understand why, but I was glad about it, even though I hadn't told him. I took a sip of my drink. The strong single malt burned my tongue for a second, while I thought about something else. "Ask if you have a type," I squeezed out before taking another sip. "I like most women I meet, but to be specific, brunette is good," he said, while I fiddled with my brown hair, gripping a strand between my fingertips and rubbing it as if for extra convincing. I knew what I was doing, getting his attention. I assumed he knew too, but I kept insisting. I had to be sure. The tall one was good too. He looked at my legs when he said that, and I felt myself melting under his gaze again. I knew what he got, and I was enjoying every second of it. And you know what I really love? He finally said as I moved over to his couch. What? I asked, pulling myself so close to him that I could feel his heavy breathing. I like your red dress, he said with a smile, the same one he'd shown me on that fateful day in court a few weeks before. It led to this precious moment between us. I took the initiative and leaned into him, surprising him for a moment before he regained his rhythm. We kissed, and it was like nothing I'd ever felt before. All these emotions that had been bubbling beneath the surface for so long finally burst out, and I couldn't hold myself back any longer. I ran my palm over his face, over his chiseled jaw, and then ran it down his left arm. It was amazing to feel his stature and the way I did my thing. I thought, yep, still got it. I was ready for some tenderness on my foggy flowers. We stopped as I stood up. He looked confused for a moment, but gradually realized where I was going as I led him in the direction of my room. It had been a long time since I'd had another person in this room with me, and I was glad it could be him. It had been a wonderful experience. With each passing hour we became more and more immersed in each other, until by dawn we were in each other's arms, embracing each other as if our lives depended on it. Suddenly the peaceful moment was interrupted by the sharp ringing of the phone. He reluctantly reached for it, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Hello," he answered in a broken voice. A faint voice came on the other end, and he sat up straight, now fully awake. "Hi, Daddy," he said, and I felt a prick of curiosity. He hung up the phone and turned to me. "This is my dad. He works as an air traffic controller and just finished his shift." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What's your dad's name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "His name is Richard," he replied, not noticing the sudden tension in my body. I took a deep breath, hoping it was just a coincidence. "Richard what?" I asked. "Richard Thompson," he said, looking at me with concern. "Why do you ask?" I felt the world spinning around me. Richard Thompson was my ex-husband's name, and he too worked as an air traffic controller. "And your mom?" I asked, barely audibly whispering. "Her name is Linda. She married Richard about 3 years ago," he explained, completely unaware of the bombshell he had just dropped. I was shocked. The young man I had just spent an incredible night with was my ex-husband's stepson. The realization of this fact hit me like a freight train, and I experienced a mixture of emotions, shock, and disbelief. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I pulled away, my thoughts were frantic. "I need time to think things through," I stammered, feeling the weight of the revelation bearing down on me. As I sat there trying to make sense of it all, I couldn't escape the thought that the universe was playing some kind of cosmic joke, and I was the unwitting victim. Now I was torn between the warmth of our connection and the cold reality of a strange new dynamic, not knowing how to move on.